Hi guys! In the last video we saw what was a DAO, and today we're going to see why most companies will die in the next 5 years or will have to adapt to a new trend, which is called DAOs. So first, maybe let's talk about limited companies and why this old system is not working as much as it used to in the 20th century. Back in the 20th century, there was a limited company, you had a king, right? Maybe a queen. And then essentially you had, people pushing products. And you were buying products because, the TV was selling so, or the salesman was selling so, or maybe a friend was telling you that. But it was never community-driven type of business. It was a very product, driven companies. And that model has been working for a long time, but you can see it has been dying up. And why? Well, essentially because the digital era came. And through the digital era was essentially all the new Uberization, right? We talk about that for the last 10 years. This has been the biggest phenomenon ever, which is essentially that instead of having, a king and only and a queen and users, you say, well, actually as a user, you could be a product selling the product within the ecosystem. And that's a very fantastic way to build business. Uber, for example, as you guys know, it is today one of the biggest transportation company in the world, if it's not the biggest, with over 70 billion valuation, and they don't even have one car. They don't even have, anything. They don't have a taxi driver. It's just that it's a peer-to-peer network where people say, well, I want to be a taxi driver and I'll offer this service, and you will essentially enable us to profit from your ecosystem by driving someone from A to B. And that is exactly the same what goes with Airbnb, a very young company that's less than 10 years old, started to go into the accommodation business, right? And they don't own a hotel. And as of today, they have more rooms, they have more clients, and they have more revenue and better valuation than any hotel company, any of them, even bigger than, Hilton Group, which was one of the biggest ones. And that's crazy because the platform enables users to rather take advantage by letting their services and people be renting their services. And it's a great way where you matchmake different people who have different needs. And that is obviously, what came to that from every industry from 2000, let's say, early-ish to today. And that's definitely the business model that everyone dreams to have. I mean, how many pitches that I went and oh, we're the new Uber of blah, 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 blah. But that's a really good way of doing business. But is it really the best way to create an ecosystem that is community driven? I'm going to ask you a very clear question, and an easy one too. Who was the first Uber taxi driver? Impossible to answer. Who was the first host on Airbnb in New York? No one knows that question either. So you realize that the users that have created all this ecosystem, they're not really rewarded. And there's a very strong conflict interest between the king, again, the CEO of the company, the user, that's all the way beneath it, and at top of it, the shareholders. And those shareholders could be any VCs that are funding the company, right? And Uber or any other Airbnb or any of these platforms today that would have a peer-to-peer business model, have the problem of that, should we please the people who have invested in the company or the people who are actually using our products or helping to build the ecosystem? They always have that issue. Is that, should I answer to money or should I answer to the users? And as that's going on and will be going on forever, you will see a misalignment between those. And that, unfortunately, doesn't make a lot of sense. And if you go to Facebook, it's even bigger and greater that this situation is that where you have Facebook, fantastic platform, one of the best social media of all time, has transformed the society, big fan of it, and SwissBorg as well. But on the flip side is that, okay, I'm posting content all the time, and the only thing I'm getting is likes. So I'm getting a great ego boost. I'm getting more influence within the platform. But am I getting really rewarded in shares of Facebook? Or is it Warren Buffett that's getting rewarded the most because he bought the stock at 10 and today is at whatever? That's where, again, there's a big misalignment. Shareholders and users. And it goes for every platform like that. So that was the reason, before everything started back then, we started to create the word of DAO, the Decentralized Autonomous Organization. A great way where you could create a network, work an idea, and distribute profits based on who is contributing to the network. Not all the people who are the only investing, but people actually using that network. And that's why Bitcoin was created. But a DAO, is that possible for every company? Do you think that tomorrow your company you're working could be a DAO, you don't need a legal entity, and it could only be based on users? Do you think so that you don't need anymore to work at your company and you just need to work for an ecosystem without any contracts and no legal entity and authority behind it? That one is hard to say. A lot of people have been doing that. They have been great people, have been mining Bitcoin back then in 2010 when Bitcoin was so small and the costs of energy was much higher from the reward they're getting from mining Bitcoins, which obviously today, hopefully these guys, they kept their private keys and they're multimillionaires. But you had that already, right? You still had the possibility to join to one of those networks and contribute, and based on your contribution, you'll get rewarded. But it's harder when you think about, transportation or to any other different business. So the question is, what is the model? Is it we're going to stay on this archaic, limited company where you don't have a peer-to-peer connection? Will it be the Uber side? Will you still have that conflict between shareholders and users? Or is it going to be the DAO, which is more like a fantasy type of mindset where everything is utopia and you're able to, regardless of the laws, make profits from any industry? Hard to say. I think so most probably the one that's taking over, it is maybe the hybrid DAO. So it'll be a combination from those three different models, right? Because it does work very well for Bitcoin. It works very well for Ethereum as well. But as we're seeing more and more protocols and more dApps or just utility tokens, it's really hard to have a governance model where you say, okay, all the users could essentially create a system where we get rewarded. It's really hard when you put in products that have a legal background and have to have, a strong governance models. So hybrid DAOs is what I think is the best. And why is it doing that? Let's take the example of Steemit, right? Steemit, for example, it's very similar to Facebook, but on the flip side of it is that each time that someone contributes within the Steemit platform, it's very similar to Reddit or Facebook, you get up likes. And based on the activity, you actually make money in a very transparent way. However, there's a protocol behind it that is Dan Lemire that created it, the same founder as Ezio, which is amazing, has a company. So there'll be ways where they could organize a model where they could essentially decentralize the users, but still have a corporate identity behind it that could back the DAO, that hybrid model. And I think so it's a fantastic way. It's a real great way where you could create technology and you could govern technology. You could make sure that you have transparency, that you could reward people based on this real meritocracy. And at the same time, you could have an inner circle of governance where you have people taking the right choices as it's growing and making sure that the legal impact and everything was doing, it's in rule with the countries where they're active. And with that, you have other companies. I think so. EOS as well, it's a fantastic protocol, but now what they're doing more and more is that through EOS is that obviously you have the governance model that's around their blockchain, but as well regarding all the different projects, you have more and more video games that are being plugged on EOS platform, and EOS, the founders and the teams are really helping these different dApps to be going on their platform. And it's a great thing, right? We know very well that, if you want to build Apple ecosystem, it's going to be very hard if there's not a clear framework. And I think so EOS is doing a great job on that. And at SwissBorg, to get back at us, it's something very similar. We have our ecosystem. We have our CHSB token that represents all the wealth that will go through our network, and all the products and services will always be based on the token economy that is within the CHSB token, but on the same time, for the level of governance and licenses that we have to apply and make sure we have a limited company. And that limited company is not, the purpose is not to get rich out of it. Let's make it very clear here. The limited company is not to distribute dividends or essentially to, start raising money and getting external shareholders like that we could pump up the valuation of SwissBorg limited company. No, not at all. On the opposite. We always want to make sure that all the wealth is always distributed to the CHSB token. However, on top of the CHSB token, we want a limited company in order to govern it, to make sure that we have the right licenses in Malta, for example, for European distribution. We want the right licenses in Japan for the distribution of our products and our services within Japan, and in Switzerland as well. And this is a very, very interesting model that every founder or every employee of a company should be looking at. Say like, okay, Uber model is great, but there is misalignment between shareholders and users. And this is extremely important that people have to recognize. And that is the winning model. It's making sure that you have an ecosystem with users that governs the model within the network, okay? And on top of it, for taking the more, let's say, legal implications and other strategic overview, you want essentially, you want a committee where people have a limited company where you could take those directions. And hopefully one day, like Ethereum or like Bitcoin or the process, everything will be linked to smart contracts, right? We'll have an oracle that will be on top of it, and everything could be governed within the old system of the DAO. But for the time being, that combination of the two is for sure the best. I hope you really enjoyed this video. As you know, guys, our community app is about to launch. It's really exciting time. We'll be on the App Store and as well on Android. It's going to be about predicting Bitcoins and being meritocratic about it. And the next thing we're going to talk about is how do you create an international community and how do you raise $52 million within an ICO? We'll talk about that. Keep tuned in. Please comment, share, like the YouTube channel, and take care, guys. Bye.